Hey there, thanks very much for joining me again. Today I'm going to look at my workflow and share some insights into why my workflow is the way it is. I did a video just a couple days ago and it prompted some comments from people that I wanted to kind of respond to through a workflow related video. And I'm also thinking about spending a bit more time maybe on Fridays focusing on the production mixing side of things. So if you have thoughts on that, please put them in the comments and I'll take a look and see what everybody's opinions are. Are you interested in learning more about the mixing and the production cycle of things on the Cubase side? So there are three components to my workflow, and this is how I get from the beginning of a scoring project or any kind of production music project to the end where I actually have a 2-track stereo master. Those three components are Dorico, which I use for all my composing. That's where I create harmonies, I write melodies, and I'll orchestrate instruments that are from a traditional orchestra. I'll do all that orchestration as well inside Dorico. Cubase is an environment where I do all the production. So all of the technical stuff around maybe matching beats in my music to specific edits or cuts in the film if I'm doing scoring. If I'm doing production music, then it's an environment where I might do tempo changes, key signature changes, things like that, just map things out into maybe sections or segments, make sure I have certain drops and edit points in my production music there. Film scoring and production music do have sort of different requirements there, but I do the technical stuff in Cubase, and it's also where I do all the production, so all the mixing, any effects, any bussing, mastering, all that stuff happens in Cubase. I don't bother doing any of that in Dorico simply because Dorico's environment for that is not as rich, and I don't think the Dorico developers intend to make it so. There is a third component to this, which is Vienna Ensemble Pro. And I use Vienna Ensemble Pro to host all of my instruments. The reason for this is that I like to be able to have MIDI playback from either Cubase or Dorico, and I hear exactly the same thing. This means that I do some basic pre-mixing in VE Pro. So VE Pro is where I host my instruments. It's also where I would do subtle effects, not heavy mastering, not compression or dynamics, things like that, but things like I might in that environment do some high pass filters, things like that to tidy up and pre-mix. Although I find generally when I'm working with my advanced sound libraries, which are the Orchestral Tools Berlin series for orchestra, the brass and the strings, the percussion and woodwinds, that they don't really need a whole lot of mixing. And I find that good orchestral samples don't really need a lot of mixing. I think this is because over hundreds of years, the orchestra developed to have naturally a good mix. So sorry, I got a bit distracted there for a minute. What I want to do first is show you what kinds of things I might do in Dorico, and also give you some clear sense about what each of these tools is really good at. So let me bring up my screen here. So let's say I've opened up Cubase. I have a template that I've created, which is called spotting, and you can see I've just create multiple iterations of it. Every now and then I have to add something to it. So if I go ahead and I create this project, and I'm going to go with production, I'll go into my junk here where I have test projects, and I'll open up my project. Now the main thing that I'm going to do in Cubase is I'm going to do any kind of tempo mapping with video, create any mapping around edit points. For production music, I may need to produce a trailer or a cue that is precisely 2 minutes long. Those kinds of technical constraints I'll put in here, and I'll figure out, okay, well, what would be a right tempo for this genre? Let's say I wanted to create some sort of exciting action-oriented cue. Maybe it's for a trailer, but it needs to be 2 minutes and 15 seconds. What's a good tempo? What are the sections going to be? I would break that all out in Cubase here. And I would also, if I was doing film scoring, I'd bring in the film and I would actually set markers at various places, and I have a bunch of buttons set up here on Stream Deck so that I can just create, markers very quickly. And, maybe these are my 5 markers, and I'll rename them, go to my workspace. So I'll name this, one thing happens, stuff like that. That's essentially what I'm trying to do. What happened there? I'm being hasty, so things aren't working exactly like they happen normally. So let's say that I create a new marker and I call it, thing happens. And over here in my video, another thing happens, and it's exciting. Even though it's a demo, I want to get my, and then, okay, this is a new hit. This is edit point. Okay, so I've got that. And then I decide, okay, a good starting tempo for this. I'll take myself off the screen. I'll say, okay, a good starting tempo for this, is actually going to be 115, let's say. And then I'll go in here and I'll do some tempo mapping. I might say, okay, I want, thing happens to land on bar 17. I'm going to switch to snapping to events so that I can snap right on there. I say, oh, okay, I want this to happen right on. I'm going to change my thing here to half notes. So I say, oh, I really want that to happen there, and then I want this to happen halfway through that measure. So I've snapped some things, and that's created this tempo timeline. I'll do that sort of technical work to come up with a tempo map in Cubase before, I write any music. I'm not going to write music here. Then I would export this. This is my workflow almost every time. Export this MIDI. You do have to have a MIDI track, even if it's empty. Sometimes I just call it dummy. And then I export this as a MIDI file, and I'll call it tempo track. So this is going into my toolbox. I'll create this called tempo track. Okay. That's the first process. That's the first third of my development process. I haven't dealt with any instruments yet. I've just given myself the constraints. I've decided how long is this music? Are there specific edit points I need to mix? Do the tempos need to change at all? And that's because the warping tools, the grid matching tools in Cubase is so flexible, so powerful. This is a great place to start. I might doodle in some melodic ideas if I feel like it, or that I came to my studio with an existing idea. But from there, I'm going to head into Dorico. And Dorico is generally where I'm going to compose and orchestrate. So let's say that I'm still waiting for Dorico to load up. In Dorico, once I load up the project, I also have a template in there. It has things like my playing techniques preloaded, has my fonts that I like to see, so everything's laid out, has presets for, or the defaults are set for engraving, for my layout options, for playback options, things like that that I've learned over time. I've all saved it into my own template. So I would come here and I would say create new. I'll create a demo here. I would go to my scoring category, and this is my template right here that I've created. And I would go ahead, create project. All right. It's going to create the project, and I know at this point that I've got all my usual playing techniques. I've got my expression maps preloaded. Anything about fonts and labels, lines, things that are custom that I might want to do. All right. Now I would come in here, and the first thing I would do is import my tempo track. So I actually, it's kind of weird. You export MIDI from Cubase, you import a tempo track here, and this way it won't incorporate any of the MIDI. Let me go ahead to productions and go down here to test projects, And there's my tempo track right there. I'm going to load that up. It asks me what I want to do. I'm going to bring this into my main template. I want to keep all that stuff, markers, that's all good. And as you can see, now I much prefer to work in galley view. But you can see that now I've got tempo changes, right? And I've got my markers. So over here I've got another tempo change. I've got the exciting marker. And later on I've got maybe another tempo change, and there's the edit point, right? So I've got it all in here, and I know now that any music that I write in Dorico here is going to slap right back. My MIDI or audio, whatever I output from Dorico is going to slap right back into my Cubase project that I started with perfectly. It's all going to play back. If there's video in there, it's going to hit all my sync points because the grid is all matched, right? And I know that, you know, if I write 8 bars between these in Dorico, between these two markers, it's going to wind up being 8 bars back in Cubase, and that's what I want. I don't actually often want to sync playback in Cubase with Dorico. Sometimes I do, but rarely enough that I'm not going to really discuss that here. And I have given an outline on that in previous videos. Okay, so now I might compose something, and let's just say all I've got in this sketch to begin with is 3 pianos. So let's say that, you know, I create a little melody here. I'll go ahead, create a 1, 5, 6, 4. Whoop. I don't want to do that. I'll do to F. Did I do that right? Hang on, 1, 5, 1, 5, 6, 4 is what I want. Back to 4. Okay, so at this point I know I'm going to hit Shift Q, I'm going to type in, I've got a C, a G, an A minor, and an F, right? Now I would have this, since I have Dorico Pro, I will right click and I'll go to chord symbols, generate notes from chord symbols, hit OK, and lo and behold I get these chords. I also might just type them in. Just go in here, hit 8 for full notes, enable chords with Q, and type in C, E, G, and then type in G, B, D. Well, actually what I'll do instead with some nice voice leading there is B, D, G, and keeping with the voice leading, C, E, A, and C, F, A. Okay, so now I've got a very basic harmony melody. So my workflow generally in Dorico starts with sketching. I will sketch something with just pianos, maybe 3 pianos like this, although I generally only need 2 piano grand staves. And I'll sketch out my melody matching all the edit points, matching all of the markers that I've imported from Cubase. And I will sketch out my harmony and melody, counter melodies, maybe rhythmic engines if there's some ostinatos that I want to have. I'll sketch all that stuff out in piano. I'm not dealing yet with orchestration, flutes and clarinets and all that stuff. Not at all. If the music sounds good and it's compelling and it supports the film, or it's getting to the emotion that I want with just plain Jane piano, it's going to sound really, really nice when I spread it out to the whole orchestra. Okay, so that's the first step, is I will do this sketch. I'm moving through this more quickly, obviously, than a normal workflow. Now I would come into setup. I would take my sketch. I don't actually want the video attached to this. I'm going to detach that for now. And I would duplicate this flow. And I would call it, orchestration. And then up here in my layouts, I've got my sketch. I'm going to rename this one. Well, actually, I'll just use the one that's labeled orchestration. Bring that up here. And orchestration just shows my orchestration flow. Four-handed sketch just shows my four-handed sketch flow. And now it's very natural for me to use this drop-down box to choose between them. I want my orchestration also to be in galley view. So I've got the same basic thing here, but now in my orchestration project, I'm going to add, let's say, let's do some strings. So I'm going to bring in violin, viola, and cello to this orchestration. Okay. So now when I'm in write mode and I'm in my orchestration, I can see my violins. Because I have Dorico Pro, I can explode. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to select violin 2, cello, and viola. And I do right click, paste special, explode. And that does this. So now I've moved the voices appropriately to those different instruments. Viola looks all right. I might bring that up an octave, and I'm certainly going to bring these in violin up maybe even 2 octaves like that. I'm going to move my melody into the violin like that, and maybe put in some markers for legato. This is just a demo of my workflow, mind you. This is not what I consider a great piece of music, but I typically would spend a day writing a piece of music, and obviously that makes an impractical live stream. So I've moved this melodic and harmonic ideas to my string sections. I'll come back here and I will just take these pianos out of my orchestration. Yes, you can delete the music. I don't need it anymore in this particular flow. If I ever want to get back to it, I can always go back to my sketch layout, and that has the original piano parts in it. But now I'm in the orchestration phase. So I haven't gotten back to Cubase yet, but let's listen to this. Okay, so nothing's playing back. This is where VE Pro comes into the scene. So this is my VE Pro setup. I've got a bunch of different instances. I've got winds main, brass main, and strings main. This is this is my bread and butter. My basic violin section, the essential brass, and the essential strings, woodwinds, and so on and so forth. These are the essentials. These are the things that I'm going to use pretty much all the time. And they're just sitting there on VE Pro all the time. I do run it on the same computer. I don't have any problems. I'm running an M2 MacBook Pro with 64 gigs of RAM. It's not an Ultra. I think it was maybe Max, M2 Max. So it's a powerful computer. It's a laptop. It's a MacBook Pro so that I can go mobile. But I'm not getting playback here. And I'm not sure why. Let me check out why that might be. My sound interface is an RME. So let's say that I play this back and look at what I'm getting. So I want to make sure that in the ATEM I've got Dorico playing back. So let's see if I'm getting audio in the mixer. I just replaced my audio card, so I'm still getting used to things a little bit. So it's not actually even playing back, probably because it's not loading the instruments. So let me go to play mode and just see, what's violin doing over here. Oh, I can see it's not connected because something was already using it. So Cubase was already using, that's what happened. So let me close Cubase. I want to save this. I'm going to save this in test projects. Let me go ahead and call it demo. Put today's date on it. And I might say, okay, this is Cubase. I'm going to call this demo. Close up Cubase. Once that's all closed, my VE Pro instances are no longer busy. So I can go up here to play, and I have a playback template called Maestro. So I'm going to load that up, and that will do all the loading for me, whatever instruments I have chosen. So it should be a very quick adjustment. If anybody has questions, feel free to post them in the comments. I'll try to respond as I'm going through this. Okay, so now I've got playback here. Now everything's connected. Let's listen to it. Ah, magnifique, an absolute masterpiece, right? Now, I am getting portamento in there, and that is simply because the velocities in orchestral tools dictate that outcome. So if I bring my velocities down, I'm not going to get portamento anymore. I am getting legato, which is nice. All right, so I might put in some dynamics here. I'm going to say I want my violin ones to be playing in mezzo forte, my viola, mezzo piano. I want my violin two. I'll say mezzo piano, my cello at mezzo forte. Now my dynamics are being conveyed via CC1 and CC11. You see down here there are gray lines that indicate those changes for each instrument. And that is because in my expression maps, which I've covered many, many times on my channel, in the expression maps, I use CC1 and CC11 for my dynamics. That means that when I write dynamics into the score, Dorico generates that CC1, CC11, and then that gets into my MIDI export that's going to go back to Cubase here. And Cubase will play that back to VE Pro, and I'll get exactly the same playback the whole time. So what I'm hearing here in Dorico is exactly what I'll hear when this MIDI is back in Cubase. So let's do that. Now I've set some basic dynamics. I've done some phrase markings. I am using the right articulations and all that sort of thing. So now I'm going to export MIDI. I'm going to go back to Cubase. I only want to export my orchestration. So let's see, I want to export that to productions. It was test projects, I believe. Here's the demo. Let's go with actually what the problem there was that I haven't saved this project yet, I don't think. So let me save. And I want to save this. So because I hadn't saved, it didn't know where to put my stuff. I often have a Cubase and Dorico file for any one of my scores or productions. I'm going to call this demo. Now when I go to export my MIDI, you can see that the file path is set up correctly. Exporting MIDI is super easy. I'm going to close this down so that the instruments all work back in Cubase. Loading up Cubase again. So now I'm through 2/3 of my workflow. The first third was define any technical constraints, maybe edit points, film matching specific cues or edits in the film in Cubase, getting that tempo track into Dorico where I do all my composition in a sketch with piano, branch that out to a full orchestration with other instruments, always hearing the instruments through VE Pro. And now if I come back to my original project, which was this demo project, now I'm going to import my MIDI from Cubase. I do not want to create a new project because this one has all my stuff mapped onto it, right? So I go into Dorico to flows, and I import my MIDI, and this is what I get. It's all in exactly the same place in time that it was originally. So I have these instruments here, and I have some macros set up on a stream deck. I've got a little stream deck to my right, a little stream deck to my left, and they have different buttons that facilitate essentially macros and project logical editor presets in Cubase that I've set up. Let me take myself off the screen. Okay, so in Cubase, I'm going to do the first step, which is just a button, is to dissolve these parts. And I've done this in a long video before. This breaks it out. Sorry, I need to show all tracks so you guys can see what's happening here. So you can see now I've got all of these different instruments. What's going on here? Well, different channels, I use channel switching. These different channels go to different articulations. So these are basically different articulations, maybe legato, portato, things like that, based on my expression map. So this is all very complicated for me to think about. That's why I've set up a bunch of macros so that I don't have to think about this stuff. Because my next button is tidy this the heck up, delete any empty parts. So now I get this. Okay, it's been tidied up, and I have things broken out by instruments. You'll notice that there are numbers, 1, 7. So like 7s are legatos, 1s are regular sustains. My setup tracks all that stuff for me. I don't have to be concerned. But now if I rename, you'll see that these get renamed in a way that's very useful. So now I can see, oh, that's portato, that's sustain, so on and so forth, right? Now I go ahead and I connect all my instruments, and what you're going to see is that in my inspector for violins 2, watch right here, when I click the button to connect, it connects up my instruments to VE Pro directly so that when I play back, it's exactly the same as it was in Dorico. It's a little louder in this case, and that's because of the way that I have things configured in Cubase. But I know that it's playing exactly the same samples and articulations. It's timed exactly to whatever the original tempo track was. If this was a longer piece, it would match up with all of those tempo track edit points. So I'm in Cubase now, and I will typically bus these. So let me take myself off. I'll say, okay, I'm going to, again, these are macros that I have set up. I'm going to say, put all those in a folder. I'm going to call this folder strings. I want them all to be my strings color, which is green, and all the tracks become green like that. And now I've got a very orderly, especially if I've got winds and brass and percussion. But let's say that, you know, I've got this string part. So my viola is not patched through, and that may be a consequence of my new sound program, my new interface. But let's look at violin. That's playing back correctly. I'm going to just loop a little chunk of it. Option P. So let's take a very common hypothetical situation that I face, which is that I want to augment this violin with maybe a synth, or excuse me, I thought I might sneeze. Let's say that I want to augment this with other instruments. This is a very common thing. Well, now that I'm in Cubase, it's very easy for me to go and say, okay, you know, I'm going to add an instrument. I'll go to contact. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do here. Wait for the instrument to load up. I'm going to look for, let's say, ambience. Oh, stray light sounds nice. I'm going to go stray light. I'll find a preset. Make sure. All right, I like auspicious flutes. I'm going to load that up. So now I've got auspicious flutes here. But I'm going to actually, this is very commonly something I do. I'm going to copy my violins down here so that now I've got both instruments playing. I might blend this. And in that way I will layer these things up. So I'll take the MIDI maybe from my cello and I'll double it onto a bass synth or more strings. Maybe I want to run it through another string library to really fatten it up. But I've got all the MIDI, so it's very easy for me at this point. Doing that in Dorico is possible, but I don't prefer it because in Dorico, you know, setting up a lot of instruments, having a really complicated playback template can get kind of overwhelming. So really I just have playback templates in Dorico set up for orchestral work because that's where it makes sense to notate more. When I'm working with these textures, maybe phrase-based libraries, it doesn't make as much sense to work with notation. It's not how I think personally. I would value anybody's feedback or ideas about, you know, how they work in this workflow that they might suggest an improvement. Okay, so at this point, I started in Cubase. We'll do kind of a summary here. I started in Cubase. I created the technical specs and timing, edit points and markers, any tempo changes, signature changes. I exported that to a tempo track, brought it into Dorico. I have another template in Dorico that has all my fonts and my playback templates, playing techniques, all that. I compose a sketch, then I orchestrate it. I export the MIDI, I bring it back into Cubase. Now I can layer it up however I want. I can group it. I can send all these strings to a bus. That's, you know, pretty much what I would do. I would say, okay, I'm going to send all of these minus that. I'm going to send these to a group. Well, actually, I have to actually do that with my rack instruments. So these rack instruments, all of these here, these represent the outputs from VE Pro directly. So these green ones here, these are my VE Pro outputs. And as you can see, these are actually already bused to routings. So I could say, you know, I'm going to take these and I'm going to route these to a group, a bus called strings, or in the case, I actually have that already set up in my Cubase template. So I already have a strings, and I actually have strings high and strings low. So I might take violins 1 through viola, bring up my mixer, and in here it's very easy for me, Option Shift, to make sure that these all go to strings low. I just have to scan out so I can see them. Strings high, I'm sorry, is what I want. Now those are all going to strings high, while cello and bass are going to go to strings low, right? And then I had my contact instrument over here, which I want to actually route to which one of my buses. Let's go with, I don't have a bus set up for that right now, so maybe I'll go ahead and create a new one. This is a very important part of my workflow. I'll create a synths, right? So now if I am looking at just my group channels, I have my synths, and I also have, I can come over here to visibility, and I can turn on my strings high and low. So now I have a very simple interface Turn all my mutes off and solos off. It's very easy at this point for me to start mixing. I'll generally do all the mixing on the buses. I don't really mix the individual instruments too much. So what made this workflow work to get from here to the point where I have a final mix, and just to, I guess, finish the whole workflow, I would add effects on these buses, tweaking EQ, a little bit of compression, send it all to the mix bus, the final master or the 2 mix, bounce that out, now I've got a stereo file, I'm done. The mixing is also, you know, time consuming, like the composing and orchestration can be. So I'm not going to demonstrate that particularly thoroughly here. But the workflow is essentially start in Cubase with the fine details, move into Dorico for all the scoring, composition, and orchestration, move back into Cubase, but I know it's all synced because Cubase and Dorico are working off the same time signature changes, the same key signature changes, the same tempo changes, all that stuff. And then I know that whether I'm working with the MIDI in Dorico or I'm working with it in Cubase, I'm hearing exactly the same sounds. I don't have to worry about connecting stuff up. Did it take me a long time to get here? Yeah, it took a long time for me to get here. Is it a pain in the butt setting up Project Logical Editor presets and macros in Cubase? Yeah, it is. It is a pain in the butt. But now I can produce, you know, a few minutes of high quality music and stay in the creative flow in a day. That's awesome. There's no way I could have done that before I had Stream Decks set up with buttons. You can't do it. You just can't do it. If you don't have presets, if you don't have templates in Cubase, I've got templates that already connect to all the VA Pro instruments. I've got templates that have like my tempo track and arranger track, rulers, things that I need to see all the time to judge time in bars. I've got buttons that switch to the tools I need. I need the warp tool in Cubase. I have a button for that. Do I need to write in quarter notes in Dorico? I've got a button for that. Making everything so that it's visual. It's right here. It's tactile. I don't do menu diving. That's key, and it is time consuming to set up. I would say it's taken me the better part of a year to get to the point where I have this workflow and it just works for me day in, day out. I understand it thoroughly. I don't have problems, and if I do, I know how to troubleshoot them right away. VE Pro is rock solid. Cubase is rock solid. Dorico is rock solid. I don't have computer crashes. I just upgraded to an RME audio interface, and I have to say I'm super, super, super impressed. I don't get into products on my channel really at all, but that's been key to why and how this has actually been functioning for me. Okay, so let me wrap up by saying that the workflow is designed to foster creativity. I know there's a lot of technical stuff I've covered, but the idea is not to cover technicalities. That's not what I think you want to focus on. Use the technology to foster creativity. I want to come into my studio and be in the creative flow instantly. You know, I don't want to waste any time. That's why I have PLE, Project Logical Editor presets. It's why I've set up the Stream Decks. It's why I have faders for writing in my CC1 and CC11 on strings. All this technical stuff, it really is a headache. But designate like a week or a couple of weeks or a couple of months, whatever the time is, designate time. If you're serious about doing this professionally, designate time to do the technical stuff where you can just get into, I think it's your right brain that does that. I can never remember if it's a right brain or left brain. Whatever the side of your brain is that does tech stuff and is analytical, dive into that. Spend some time in that side of your brain and work it out, right? The idea is anytime I find myself doing something 3 times, I automate it. If I had to do it 3 times, automate it. I find a button and I just figure it out. How the heck can I automate this? I figure it out and make a button for it. I'm done. It saves me mountains of time. all of that is getting to the point where you can come into the studio and it's just creativity, man. I can just think, I'll doodle on my piano, come up with a melodic line, track it just like that. It's in Dorico now, it's in notation. Oh, I can see what the melody is implying, this harmony. Punch in my harmony with my keyboard. Boom, I use, the Pro feature to explode that out to my trombones. I'm already into orchestration. I'm experiencing music making. I'm not thinking tech. But if I run into a tech problem, then I make it, I jot it on a list. I do my work the best I can. And then every week I spend some time just getting into that analytical part of my brain. I look at my list and I refine my templates, save a new iteration of my Cubase template, save a new iteration of my Dorico template, maybe save a new iteration of my VE Pro setup. That's the way I do it. And I keep refining over time. Every time I encounter a problem, I jot it down. A different time of the week, I solve it. And now, after a year of doing that, I'm at a point where I come in, I just am really fostering that creativity. And that's what technology can do for you. So if you have questions, maybe this has raised a lot of questions. I think I'm going to focus a bit more on mixing and the production side of thing on Fridays, spending Dorico, definitely focusing on Dorico on Wednesdays with my main live stream each week. If you have comments on this particular video, please do leave some comments down below. I always get those. I always follow up. I can't follow up every day on the day. Please be patient with me. I'm thrilled that my channel is growing and I'm reaching more people, but it can actually be, it's quite time consuming to keep in touch with everybody. And I want to respond with sensible answers, not just kind of like, yeah, but I want to look up answers and be constructive and helpful with you guys. Really appreciate everybody who supports my channel and subscribes. If you're new to the channel, please do like and subscribe. And I will see you next week. Have a great weekend. Bye.